121, and of course we've got the Lifestyle and Community Committee meeting. Today we're joined by our Acting Mayor, of course with Mayor Tom Tate on an important trade mission in Birmingham. So let's just walk through the agenda, shall we? I think we'll be unstarring quite a few items. Confirmation of minutes, I think we can star that unless there are any objections. I will star that. Are there any conflict of interest declarations to be made today, councillors? No? We'll deal with that. Item 5.1, proposed agenda items for the Lifestyle and Community Committee. Any need to unstar that? No? Wonderful. Local area works program additions. No, we'll leave that starred. Review of major sporting venues, bookings and cancellation policies, we'll leave unstarred. Councillor Gates proposes an amendment there. Streets of Remembrance, we'll leave unstarred. Councillor Gates proposes an amendment there. Licence plate recognition technology, safety camera. It's a closed item, councillors. Was there any desire for a presentation or questions? This is the second time we've considered it. You happy to star it? Leave it unstarred, no dramas. Councillor Caldwell. What is that, Councillor?
Page 19. The Community Committee being the 2nd of August, and I think it might be the 2nd of September. Isn't today the 2nd of August?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just
right.
no. It's only an administrative thing, but it's just a date on page 19.
Good catch. At least we know someone's reading the agendas.
I've only just noticed it then. I missed it this week when I read the agenda. All right,
councillors. Item 7.2, Gold Coast Regional Botanic Gardens Update, Biodiversity Visitor Centre, Strategic Direction Report, Rossa House, presentation. Yep, no dramas. I propose a general business item, which is a vote of thanks, and Councillor Gates has a general business item concerning Enkelman Farm. So unless there are any conflicts on those two, no? Beautiful. All right, so to our secretarial support team, we should have starred item 3, item 4, item 5.1, item 6.1. Councillors, any objections to moving those on block? No, moved Councillor Tozer. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Castro. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? All those against? That is carried. All right, councillors, we have item 6.2. I have a question and Councillor Gates has an amendment. So, Councillor Gates, would you like to moot your proposed wording?
Thank you, Chairman. Just as a bit of background, this report came forward after I'd received a couple of complaints from schools about the late notification of the indoor facilities being available, primarily at Carrara and at Coomera. And it seems to me that the report that I got from one of the principals suggested that they were only given 2 days' notice when they wanted to book because the Gold Coast Careers Festival and Taekwondo events were being held there. So that was what generated this general business item. I understand that sometimes when our fields are wet, it requires the cancellation because the fields can't be used, but that in turn means that the indoor booking that is held at the same time needs to be cancelled. So I see that officers have addressed that. But what I hope to do was put a new 3 in the recommendation that says that except for inclement weather conditions, the cancellation of permanent school bookings be notified no less than 7 days in advance. So that was a new 3, and then 4 is the same, that an officer from major sporting venues attend.
Director, do you have a view on that, the workability of that?
Through the chair, so no, that's absolutely fine, and I think it's good to call it out. It's what we really do anyway, I think. Right. Yeah.
I have a question. So I was contacted by the Robina City Soccer Club during the week, and they're in a terrible situation with respect to their fields, and we've corrected that today with some funding towards some rebuilding. But quite often our clubs who are affected by inundation and field closures will seek bookings at Alabaster, right? Yeah, Bob, Alabaster?
Alabaster, yep.
But then during the course of the week, the fields may open again, and they're saddled with sometimes a $750 to a $1,500 booking at those fields. Do city officers have a view around dealing with those cancellations when a club is able to make a cancellation as opposed to the city making a cancellation?
Well, yeah, through the chair, we certainly, we're a user pays site, so all bookings are user pays. The fields at Alabaster are 90% occupied between 5 p.m. and 8 p.m. each night. So if a Robina Nights is cancelled or closed due to inclement weather and we remain open, due to the standard of our field, doesn't guarantee that the fields are open. So we have a lot of community groups that use that facility. Primarily they are community groups, and we have bookings on that site that are 6 months in advance. So we don't have the discretion to waive fees for one community group over another based on their fields being inundated.
Thanks. I just made a commitment to ask the question. Yep. So that's on the public record. Councillors, any further questions? No? Councillor Gates, are you happy to move that?
Certainly.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor O'Neill. There we go. There we go. Councillors, any speakers against? No, don't think we really require debate. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? All those against? That is carried. All right, councillors, we have our Streets of Remembrance pilot agenda item. I understand Councillor Gates has some proposed changes.
I'm not going to move any changes until we have a presentation and I hear and ask some questions.
Councillors, who would like a presentation? All right, thanks. Councillor Young? We don't have a presentation, but we do have an opportunity to ask for... Sorry, we do?
No, we don't have a presentation.
But we have an opportunity for some questions. So we're joined by Kim, Zara, Brooke and Jemima.
So can I say a few words? Right?
Yeah, please.
So through the chair, we've got Brooke and Kim are here just to talk about the success of the pilot and all the details of the pilot. I've got Jemima and Zara here over from EPE, who will talk on behalf, obviously, the Heritage Unit in terms of any resourcing. So just in terms of how you direct your questions today, maybe Jemima could come up and give you a bit of an overview on the resources, if that's the main focus of the questions.
Let's hear about the success.
Okay, sure. Okay, Kim, did you want to give us a bit of an overview?
Yes, through you, Chair. Thank you. So as Council resolved, obviously, to do a trial Streets Remembrance project. Through that, we actually received 87 nominations across the city, and that was from a mix of general public, councillors, through social media, etc. So through that, we actually did some investigations. 37 of those were through councillors, so we actually investigated those based on the criteria, which was World War I veterans, so servicemen and auxiliary personnel. Based on that, we were actually, through Heritage supported by Local Studies Library, those streets were investigated further just to try and match those and link those with streets across the city. A little bit complex because some of our city records around early street naming, some challenges in relation to that. But through that process, we were able to identify 25 streets initially. Those 25 streets were sent to an historian, and through that process, we actually was able to identify 23 streets that were named after or had a family association with streets. We then badged 14 streets named directly after service personnel, and a further 9 streets were badged with a poppy, which was actually after the family. Obviously, those streets were named after the founding family. and they had service personnel from that family that served in World War I. So from that process, we then developed a web page. So on that web page has the 23 streets that are now listed, and we intend to do a little bit further with that through the next phase, where we'll actually get the photos, etc., and further stories about those service personnel that we're hoping longer term can generate into a booklet that can be like World War I, World War II, and should the project continue further, that could be almost catalogued like that. So it'll be a constant, I guess, record for the city. So through that, we also did a media launch. So Councillor Vorster, we had a service personnel as well from the RSL that actually came down, and the Mayor, and launched that down in Robina. From that, we got a lot of social media comments from all of the, I guess, the posts that were shared through the councillors as well. We had some great feedback. It was fairly positive all around in terms of the recognition that had been given to those veterans. We contacted the families of those family associations as well, where those details were available, just to determine and to ensure there was no issues with badging those streets with the poppy, given the original intent was after the founding families of those areas. Where we made contact, there was no issues at all from those families, and it was really positive feedback also received. Subsequently, we sent photos of the streets to those family members, just to ensure they had a record of that and that they could share that with broader family members. We received some correspondence from Fiji, so this project has reached further afield from family members that are now living overseas. I guess thanking the city for that, for recognising veterans. So overall, the community sentiment has been extremely positive to the project. So that had concluded the pilot. So at this stage, we have officially got 22 of the 23 streets badged. There's one street, which is Lanes Road in Wongawallan, which is having TMR upgrades. So as soon as those street signs are able to be...
upgrades, council upgrades.
Council, yes. So as soon as we're able to actually place that, that badge on that street, we will be doing so. So that will conclude the pilot.
Thank you for that summary. I think Councillor Gates had some questions concerning resources.
Yeah, I was a little surprised to see what was required in terms of resourcing. And my question was about the verification. What is necessary, and is there any possibility that we could require verification to be provided by anyone making a nomination?
Through the Chair. So the 0.5 FTE is obviously to project manage the project, or the Streets of Remembrance next stage. Project documentation, reporting, procurement and management of contracts. They'll be doing a large portion of the research. So for example, last year it was over 400 hours of research undertaken by the Office of Architecture and Heritage, which obviously led to some of those leads for the next stage. It will be consultation with the Navy, the Army and the Royal Air Force, coordination of the signage and assisting with coordinating the media and marketing.
What I was trying to suggest, that is there a possibility that those 400 suggested hours of research actually be handled individually by people who make a nomination, and that the evidence is provided to eradicate the need for council to do that level of research? It's simply a question whether, and I don't have an understanding of how involved that research might be. So
I'm happy to answer
I'm
that.
simply interested in that aspect.
So through the Chair, if the number of nominations that were put forward versus the number of leads that were discovered is quite disproportionate. So if we look at this next stage, the numbers, over 57 streets were resulted out of the leads through research, and not a large number were resulting out of nominations per se. So obviously the 57 is through leads, and that needs to be interrogated, and that's by officers going to places like the State Library, going to local studies library, undertaking trips to museums, any of those sort of artefacts. So it needs, I suppose, specialist knowledge to undertake that research and to go to a number of those locations. Some of those are located in Brisbane as well, so it takes a lot of legwork as well, which added to those 400 hours that occurred last year.
Okay, and can you tell me also, sorry Chairman, through you, where the suggestion came to expand the program to perhaps develop a booklet or a historic record as well as the street blades.
Do you want to?
Through you, Chair. It was obviously an idea that we had was to capture that so we could actually capture the full story of the family. So when the historian actually did that research piece, they've obviously provided more detail than just what we've placed on the website. So it was just providing a resource that we could capture that. It was planned that potentially we could look at that over the next phase of the project, or even moving forward if it's expanded further.
I know this information's already been provided in the course of the meeting, so I apologise for that. How many submissions or nominations were received by the business from councillors?
Yes, through you, Chair. There was 37 nominations directly from councillors of the 87 that were interrogated.
Okay, so I just want to do some quick math. So bear with me. So 37 out of how many? Sorry?
87.
87. So about 42.5% of nominations came from councillors, and 400 hours were incurred doing research. Now, I'm assuming the city officers carrying out the research are quite proficient at doing research, right? So let's go 42% multiplied by 400 hours. So we're looking at about 170 hours of work generated by councillor submissions. They're quite, as I said, they know what they're looking for and where to go. Probably take me twice as long. So I'm going to say it's twice. So it's about 340 hours, I would say, of councillor time that would be taken up if the burden of that research were placed on us as elected representatives. Would that be a fair assessment, or should we stick with the original 170 hours?
Through the chair, I suppose, yeah, it's hard to apportion because some were obviously easy leads, some were difficult to find the information, but you could average it out to across the 87 streets investigated.
Right, so we have Councillor Owen-Jones and Councillor Tozer.
Thank you. I too had some concerns just regarding the future resourcing of the program. I think we would all be of the position that it's been really well received by the community, and that's of no surprise to anybody, and I think that we knew that was going to be the case. I think that the challenge that the Gold Coast has is that there are it was such a small town in World War I and World War II. So I can speak in regards to the Coomera Memorial, where there's three sections for both World War I and World War II. That memorial has been, the custody of that has been held by the Coomera Valley Rotary Club for the last 25 years, who have done an enormous body of work in regards to research of each of the names of on the memorial. I think that the Gold Coast as a city probably has 6 or 7 of those memorials, and it wouldn't surprise me if a similar body of work had been done at most of those memorials by the organisations that have cared for them over this time, whether or not that's the RSL or I think the Pimpamar Memorial is a separate body. The Coomera Valley Rotary also look after theirs. So it really did surprise me that we needed to or sought to go that extra distance. So I think, for example, Beatty Road, all of the local representatives know that family gave during World War I, because it's up on the memorial to make that pretty obvious. And there's been an enormous body of research that's been done already in that regards. So I think in terms of extending the pilot into World War II, I think that there's a natural body of information that we should be able to rely on without necessarily seeking to, I'm going to say, reinvent that wheel. I think we can pay tribute to any of those families from World War II where there is a link to a known link to a road, and have that as the second pilot, rather than seeking to run down every opportunity that might exist. I know that in regards to the Coomera Memorial, I visited the War Memorial to find the names on the wall, and there's a free research centre as part of the Australian War Memorial, and quite literally I spent 2 hours there taking photos of the memorial, but also finding the information. So I suppose I'm a bit staggered that in order to run down the balance of names that might exist in regards to World War II, we need a 2-year project and $260,000. That's the bit that I think is a little bit out of kilter, particularly when the body of research that's been done to date has all been done by the volunteers. I just think that we need to maybe reposition the next pilot to actually ask for those custodians of the memorials that exist, whether or not they have any World War II names that they think directly relate, because that local community actually knows what we want to confirm, you know. So I just think that there's a different way we could go about it rather than committing a research project for 2 years for another 50-odd blades.
So I read the report and actually probably took a different view. I thought it was a little undercooked. In that, I thought it was fairly reasonable to think, like you've asked for about 1,000 hours. Half a full-time employee is about 20 hours a week over 50 weeks, 1,000 hours a year. And I thought if there was going to be 80 nominations, it seems a bit reasonable. There might be 2 days of research per, you know, knowing as a student of a university, I actually thought it was undercooked. I'm troubled. So my question is actually maybe to Zara. You know, the Office of Architecture and Heritage obviously undertakes normal work, and this is a diversion from that business as usual kind of activity. Help me understand what, you know, a day in the life of a staff member in this who might be redeployed to this project. How does that work? What would that work like in your unit?
Through the chair, we've got 2 officers in the Office of City Architect, and Jemima will help me out if I miss some of it. But we've got a number of legislative obligations that we're required to deal with, being the Heritage Register, dealing with inquiries from the public. We do a lot of work with our asset management owners for the, items that are heritage listed and that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's correct. So we have a level 8 and a level 7 permanent full-time positions. So the legislative requirement is updating and maintaining the local heritage register, updating and creating conservation management plans, especially when 60-odd of those 80-odd LHR items are owned by council. Yes. Assisting those council asset custodians with their CapEx projects and their cultural heritage risk management, protection and conservation of recent and Indigenous heritage as well, heritage inquiries, so that's internal and external, and also we have the heritage development applications, and we know there's been a number of big ones over the years as well, including one that's current.
So is it proposed that the skills in that unit be deployed to this investigation exercise? Is that what in the report? That's how I read the report. Have I read that correctly?
Well, we've got the skill set that you need to do this. We exist within the team. We hadn't fully landed on whether we were going to bring someone in with supplementary skills to upskill to do it, or who had the skills to do it, or if we were going to share the work out.
Yeah, I suppose I'm trying to work out, this team who have legislative obligations are clearly kind of deployed to a certain activity that we have to do because the law requires it. This project, I think, has so much merit and there's lots of community interest in it, but it seems like we're not legislatively obliged to name streets after war veterans, even though it's a really good idea. So I think my question is, or what I'm trying to get at is, how does this sort of project, how could it be prioritised in the context of other work that these people do? It occurs to me that it might be impossible for the current staff members to do, or just be redeployed to a half of FTE. We're actually talking about employing another person to do this work.
That is correct. So at the moment, we don't have capacity within the current resource to undertake this work. And last year, we had to deprioritise some of that work, which is not ideal when it's legislatively driven.
So help me understand what you mean by that. So you're saying that things that we legislatively obliged to do, we weren't able to do because you embarked on this project?
Correct. So things like updating the local heritage register was paused to undertake this work.
Right.
We shouldn't have.
Right.
But it's important to note, though, Councillor Tozer, just on that. City officers circulated a memo to begin with where they embarked on a process.
Yes.
And it required, I think, Councillor Belden-Lumsden and Councillor Caldwell and myself to make sure that city officers were, I suppose, adhering to the spirit of the general business item which gave rise to the project. So there was probably a lot of time burnt by city officers attempting in good faith to fulfil our general business item, but it required councillors to intervene and get them back on track in terms of what we wanted out of that process.
I get it.
So while there might have been a lot of burden, there was also a lot of miscommunication between committee, the council resolution and the work that was carried out initially.
Okay.
But that was addressed.
Yeah, through you, my intention of these questions is not to undermine the merit of the program. People in my community have expressed a strong support for the idea that we acknowledge war veterans. To me, there's no question about that. I'm just trying to make sure if we are going to embark down this track, it occurs to me that if there's going to be 80 nominations a year for war veterans from World War I and World War II, that it's reasonable and fair that there be somewhere between 10 and 20 hours of research be applied to these, in either to verify someone else's nomination is authentic and credible, that the research that they've undertaken is authentic and credible, or whether we do the research ourselves. It just occurs to me that half a full-time employee, 1,000 hours, is actually not going to be enough for us to do it unless we set a very clear metric about how many streets are we going to do each year. So my question is, maybe how many streets do you recommend we do each year with half an employee?
Through the chair, at the moment we have, let me just pull up the numbers, 37 leads, 7 family associations which were relating to the work that was just done, and 13 new street investigations. The 37 leads would be quite achievable in the half FTE person, and we can also undertake the 57 is what I'm trying to say, yeah.
So is there a mechanism by which we could legitimately outsource, I don't mean outsource financially, but outsource the nomination, verification and research process such that we still meet our obligations, that if we put someone's name on a sign,
yep,
we can be satisfied that that is an appropriately credible...
So does Councillor Gates's proposal work?
So to outsource the nominations, yes, that can be done, obviously by a specialist, through the chair, outsourcing the nominations can be done by a specialist historian. At the moment, we do currently have part of that 70,000 is used to have the work validated by a historian and prepare the website stories that is present on the websites.
Sorry, I'm just going to intervene here, and I don't mean to be disrespectful and rude, but I just want to make sure that we're on the same page. What Councillor Gates is mooting is a new nomination form wherein a burden is placed on the nominator to collect together the primary and secondary evidence that would usually be sought by a city officer during the course of research, so that...
Or whether we can contact the RSL and have them verify something that might be possible.
In any case, that a research burden is placed on the nominator so that there is less work required by a qualified specialist historian. Can we, or do you see a way forward where that burden can be shifted to the nominator so that there is less burden on, or less need for specialist historian work?
Through the chair, that is plausible. but the work of the validation historian would be higher just due to the level of research that may have been undertaken prior may not be of the same level. Yep.
I'm assuming we have a city officer that dealt with Brisbane. Right? Do we have someone here who's familiar with Brisbane's process?
Yeah.
Could you walk me through the distinction between the process that's proposed for us in this report and the process that Brisbane go through, given they have such a their list of streets is so extensive? I would be surprised if they commit as much resources to that project as we're being asked to commit for potentially a much smaller list. So can I just get an understanding on whether they have validators, specialist historians and what have you, checking every nomination? Thanks.
Through you, Chair, I can answer in terms of their scope, Councillor Vorster, but in terms of that historian and the use of a historian, I'm unaware of that. But in terms of their scope in Brisbane, it's a lot broader than the scope we had here. So it's named after places, events of historical significance. So that would not require as much validation as what I know when we started with the pilot, it was very strict in terms of from heritage around specifically named after. So that was those documents that were, relevant, that we found the street, that we found those documents that linked the person directly to the street, which then got expanded to named, highly likely named after, which then allowed us to broaden that scope to the 23 streets that got named. Brisbane's is a lot broader in terms of how they're naming their streets. So they started with a small pilot like we've done, but then over time it's been expanded.
And I suppose that's a matter of policy, how wide they want to cast that net. The feeling that I'm getting as chair, and for myself when the director and I spoke about this, is that we seem to be encumbering the nomination process, creating potentially more work than a comparable nomination might create in Brisbane. And while that might give us supreme confidence around the merit of placing that blade, the risk of there being a misstep seems quite low given Brisbane's success. So anyway, I just want to float that. Councillor Owen-Jones, we'll come to you. I've got Councillor Caldwell, Councillor Young, and then back to you, Will.
So I'm just interested through you, Mr. Chair. Are we still trying to actually prove that a street was named after the person?
Through the Chair, no, these are of the same criteria that we established during the second half of the pilot.
So my concern is that we have formed our
position,
our calculations of the research that's going to be required based on how we undertook the early part, because that's when all the hours were chewed up. Because if you're literally trying to find a council record from 1950 that says this street was named after this person, we know that's going to be impossible, just about impossible, which is why it threw up a very disappointing result in terms of that paper trail, because we know that probably through no one's fault apart from the councils of the time and the time that's passed, that was not able to be found. So, I mean, I just think that, we often use the term low-hanging fruit in this chamber. So online, you can search a copy of the plaque that's on the Southport War Memorial, which some of these names appear in the schedule already. But if we accept that that's a true historical record, do we accept that is a true historical record of names of servicemen that are on the memorial?
Through the Chair, they are historical records. It's about validating their linkages to streets.
So do we need to validate that on this list we have Campbell, presumably Campbell Street, or could be linked as being a reference to Campbell who served, Gaven, Cromie, Cotloo, Elliott, Middleton, Slatcher, Upton, blah, blah, blah. So do we actually need to prove that the Upton that's on here was in any way linked to the name of the street? Does it matter? Or can we go, there's the historical data that's on the war memorial, there's a street that's got the same name. Let's commemorate the fact that Upton was here and now Upton is there. And on a daily basis, we drive past the street signs there, and people often don't spend much time at the war memorial. So we're bringing what is often a very rare occurrence of seeing a war memorial into people's daily lives to be commemorated. Now, I just think we need to compress that process, and there's got to be, I understand that if someone says something that's a bit random and it's not on a memorial, that it might take some validation. But I think that's the less likely of the outcomes. There are enough names that are easily available at Upper Coomera and Southport and Pimpamar that we surely can pick off the other 50 very easily, without, and you know, it's not just about the expenditure, but we've already heard that it's, you know, the employment market's tight. How are we actually going to find a person to fill this role, et cetera, et cetera? So I just think we need to wind it right back, go back to basics, and then for the next 2 years, we get someone to match these things with those things, and we use that as the next cut. Before we start researching things, we just do that. And I understand there's going to be an application process to go through at the end to say, you know, can we, but it can't be that hard to package that up. Like, that should be an admin type job to fill out the forms.
Right. So thanks for the comment there, Councillor Caldwell, and well put. We have Councillor Young. So Councillor Young, then Councillor Owen-Jones, and then Councillor Lacastra, and then Councillor Melvin-Lumsden.
And thank you, Chair. I'm not on this committee, but it's just, and for me, it's, thank you, just in the date in number 4, should this get supported today, is having it as March 24, which is obviously the next election month. So do we have burden the future council with a decision that we're making 4 weeks before an election or something? So my thoughts are that should this get supported today in some shape or form, that perhaps that date should be pushed out so that if there was a continuing program or continuing allocation of budget or funding, that it would be made by the new council following the 30 March 2024 election.
It's a good point, Councillor Young. I think we're going to end up with a significantly reworked recommendation, though. It's my sense. Councillor Castro.
Sorry, thanks, Mr. Chair. It's just through you to Councillor Caldwell. I'm not quite sure if I grasped. I may have got the wrong end of the stick with what Councillor Caldwell was proposing or speaking about. So through you to Cam, are you saying that if there's a name on a plaque at a memorial, and there's a street with the same name, that we should just be able to automatically link that name on the memorial to the street?
That's what Brisbane does.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, okay. The chances of us finding a historical street naming record from 1950, circa 1950, to support it. But I mean, where else are we seriously going to sit here and say that just by chance we've got a Campbell Street, an Upton Street, a Cromie Ave, a Cotloo Street, a suburb named after the Gavin family? I mean, you know what I mean? Like, I can tell you this is not by accident, because this is how all of these early streets were established.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't want to get into debate as such, but I mean, but if you're getting a name that's not so common, yes, but if you're getting a name that is common, it may be not linked in the slightest. If you're getting a Smith Street, for instance, or there's a lot of Smiths out there, but...
Well, there's no Smith on this.
No, I know that, but I'm just saying, yeah, but I see where you're coming from, but I just wanted to make sure I did understand, because I can still see issues with it.
To me, it's a threshold decision about whether we want to lift that commemoration and take it into the people's daily lives and daily experience.
Yeah,
to more activate what that means for us.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, to my recollection, was the intent of the original GBI. that was the intent. Councillor Belden-Lumsden, then Councillor Tozer.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Just actually following on from that, though, I guess confusion was one of the streets I'd nominated was Beats Avenue in Labrador, which is on that probably the memorial that Councillor Caldwell's got open, which I said was named after Francis Frederick Beats. That one wasn't badged, but one that was badged for Francis Frederick Beats was Frank Street in Labrador. So that was, I thought the Beats connection was very clear, but then, but it
wasn't.
No. So I guess in those kind of circumstances, apparently Beats is named after his family, but not him specifically. Do we then end up with multiple streets badged in different ways?
Well, poppies are for families,
yes.
Effectively, and the rising sun, it's a rising sun logo, right? Used for specific personnel. Now, I mean, unfortunately, I don't know the story of this particular Francis, and plainly there must have been some historical document to connect Francis with Frank.
Through the chair, we have our researcher here if you want the explicit findings on that through our researcher.
And so now, are you happy to get that?
It was more just saying there was just a circumstance where I guess the names on the memorial, I thought the connection was very clear, but it was not quite as clear cut as that. That was all.
Councillor Tozer.
So it just occurs to me that none of us have a particularly emotional connection to any individual veteran in this room, and yet we've spoken about it just for 40 minutes without even thinking emotionally about it. To what extent did the team field queries from members of the public about this nomination process?
Through the chair, I'd have to again defer to my researcher for that.
I suppose I'm just trying to work out. I mean, I know that we nominated Robert Street at one point. It was relayed to me. I had a 30-minute conversation with an older person from my community who was convinced that Robert Street was named after someone of some significance. I had a subsequent 30-minute conversation with another older individual in my community who was convinced that Robert Street was actually named after a different Robert. That's just 1 hour of, I appreciate if we're just putting a sticker with a poppy on a street, we're probably pretty low risk there. But if we're actually creating a historical record that has research and that involves engagement with members of the family, it can't be done without some resource allocated. Like, I had an hour of conversation about Robert Street and it didn't get a poppy or any acknowledgement. Someone is going to have to field those phone calls once we actually acknowledge someone in someone's family. People care. We don't particularly care, but someone is going to care, and someone's going to have to field those questions.
Look, so
and we should allocate an appropriate resource for it.
Sorry, Bob?
No, sorry, I think the director is.
Well, that's fine. I'm chairing the meeting.
I was just letting you know because you were looking here. So.
Yeah, no, I just received a text message from her. So, look, councillors, at this junction, I suppose we've got 3 options. Number 1 is to accept the city officer recommendation. I don't think any of us are quite there. The other option is to ask city officers to perhaps go away and come back with a different report and a different set of recommendations that tries to mirror as far as possible the Brisbane approach, which I think reflects the example that Councillor Caldwell gave, right? By lowering the threshold that we require in order for these signs to be, or these stickers to be affixed to our street signs. The other option is to halve the amount and instead of running a 2-year trial, running a 12-month trial, right? So status quo, total rewrite, or 12-month trial. And then that overcomes one of the concerns that Councillor Young had about getting too close to March 2024.
Do you think it's fair to think that the committee and Council in general are supportive of the program continuing? That's the vibe I'm getting. Yeah,
everyone's,
like the program.
Everyone's supportive.
Yeah, so there's no doubt we want to
that's right.
run the program. So to me, that's not a question.
That's right. But the program has run its course because our pilot has finished.
Right.
So now we're forced to make a decision about how this looks over the next 12, 24 months or indefinitely. So we can either accept the model, which demands the resources that city officers require, that's contained in the report, so we can accept this model, or now that the pilot's run its course, we might feel collectively that there is such little risk attached to this, and Brisbane has done such a good job leading the way, that we actually want a model that is less resource intensive, both for the city officers and the nominators. So we want city officers to go away and propose a different model. Or 3, we accept the model that they've proposed, but we run it only for 12 months and not 24 months, which drops the funding ask from, what do you call it?
260 over 3.
Yeah, 260 down to the 130.
Back to 130 over 1 year.
And then we've got an opportunity after 12 months to say we ran a pilot with this model, we've run it the way the city officers propose in their report, and then in the 3rd year, we're actually now so satisfied there's no risk, we want to adopt the Caldwell method. So I think those are the...
Is that what you'll be referring to it as? I like that. Councillor Caldwell, you might get his support for that.
Thanks, Councillor O'Neill. My sense is those are the 3 paths we have before us at the moment. Councillor Caldwell.
Well, I'm just going to float this as a potential motion, and that is that in the initial stages we leave 1, that's fine. We delete 2 for the time being, and let's just park the funding and resourcing. 3 is okay. 4, I think we should do it in May 2024. We will be in caretaker mode in March 2024, but also there's probably a synergy with having concluded the program in the April of the Anzac Day 2024, and that we then review how things are tracking just after that. So I think it's better to be May. Number 5 is fine.
Okay.
And then I'm open to how we deal with the resourcing, but my preference is that we either make a small interim allocation to continue the work, or that the officers bring back a further report or advice between now and full council that outlines a more streamlined process for the applications to be assessed and approved, and alternate resourcing.
Totally appreciate those suggestions. I personally feel, though, that we need to provide direction to city officers around our preferred approach, and that our preferred approach is one that is as least resource intensive as possible.
Well, if that's the case, then I think 1 actually encapsulates what we think, and that is that it is named after, or very likely named after, the So, I mean, I don't know that we need to expand that more often, more broadly.
So 1, I totally agree.
Yeah.
Number two is a pseudo endorsement of the process and the resource demand that's required of that process in the report.
Yeah, I've deleted 2.
Right, but we need to replace it with something.
That's right, we do.
Right, so, and I feel as though committee and council needs to provide the guidance to city officers around what that process is. So if we're silent on it, I think we're going to run into the same problems we've had historically with we're over here and officers are over here. Councillor Gates?
Planning and Environment yesterday when I read this report and asked her for a figure to do a lesser body of research. The figure that she suggested was $50,000. So we could replace 2 with that council supports a funding request of $50,000.
Over 2 years or 1 year?
I would suggest 1 year. So because I'm certain that if we do the work from all of the war memorials, I mean, at Pimpama, for example, every year a family member that still exists speaks about the people whose names are on those memorials, and they all have information that they can verify that they bring to the ceremonies. So the war memorials are the first step, in my view, for the information. The RSL is another, and that $50,000 would allow that body of work to be done without going to the extent that's been advised this morning.
All right, so we'll leave one as is. So with 2, let's change that to 50,000. Right.
And it should be to the Office for Art. Yeah, 2.
Yeah. So sorry, 50 grand over 2 years or 50 over 1 year, right? To deliver Streets of Remembrance. Thing is, though, then we're going to run into an issue by only funding it for 1 year
with
at
the
the top of the
resolution
recommendation, and then the review being in 2024.
Okay.
We'd have to change.
So the 2024 can become 2023, right?
I think so.
Okay.
I think we could review it then and see how we've gone.
So September budget review of
Might be
50,000 to the Office of Architecture and Heritage to deliver the Streets of Remembrance program. Now, and
That include installation?
I don't know. I'm only taking Councillor Gates on good faith, given her conversation with the director. But I'm sure if we get advice from either director between now and full council, we can modify that amount slightly if it needs to.
I'm trying to think, if someone turn up, take a street sign down, put a street sign back up, replace the street sign, to me it's going to be at least a couple $100 without even starting. There's no labour involved. But to me, that's not going to be enough to put the actual street signs up that we actually want to do.
I think it should be fine. Let's put it this way. I would be the first moving a general business item through T&I to deal with the cost of replacing street signs if 25 street signs cost 50 grand.
No, I don't think they cost 50 grand, but they might cost, I don't know, maybe $500 a street sign.
Look, I'm happy to take Councillor Gates on good faith, and then if there's more information that either director provide us between now and full council, we can tweak it then. But it appears as though Councillor Gates has more information than you and I.
Oh, it's only because I asked the question because I was concerned about the level of research that may be being undertaken unnecessarily, given what point 1 said, which is or very likely named after.
Yeah, over 1 year, and let's say this may include
additional resources.
Yeah, and that can be taken to be read as personnel or whatever.
Yeah.
All right, and then part 4, we change that to May 2023?
Yep.
Because that'll be just after.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean,
and it only runs for 12
months. I don't
months.
know what the year is that everyone's talking about. What's the is the commencement 1st of July to 30 June? Yeah.
Through you, Chair, obviously every sign would be delivered in time for Anzac Day, so we'd commence the next round straight after Anzac Day.
Okay, well, that's fine.
So that works.
And then with 4, let's also change that. So the Streets of Remembrance program is reviewed in May 2023 with a further report provided to Council detailing recommendations, ongoing project scope, improvements to the nomination process, and future budget and resource requirements.
So, I mean, I think it's the nomination and assessment or nomination and approval process.
So the nomination and approval process.
Because the work is it's after you've received the nomination, it's that next step.
I think what's not clear, though, at this stage in our changed recommendation here is still in number 2. We need to direct city officers through recommendation to adopt a more lightweight nomination and approval process than the one set out in the report. Because if we don't do that, then they'll use the same process but only have $50,000 and deliver us 5 street signs. So we just need to think on, well, that's what will happen.
But would they?
Yes. So let's have a think about
the number of signs?
I think we should just. So, firstly, do we need to the wording that's in brackets, total of $50,000 over 1 year?
Yes.
Does that need to be there? It's kind of replicated.
Take out the
Streets of Remembrance program.
Can we say that it might be a dozen signs?
How about we do this?
How about a less intensive?
Let's put a part A under 2, because there'll be a funding request made through the September budget review, and just say that the related report set out a refined nomination and approval process to reduce the research and administrative burden on both the nominator and city officers. And then that way, between now and September, city officers have got time to go refine that process, and then at the moment that we're asked for the 50 grand, we can sign off on that new light touch process.
So do you want to amend 4 now? Because you kind of repeated in 4.
No, because at the end of this new process running, we want to review it again.
Okay.
So I think you should just clarify, Mr Chair, if I can, that when you say that the related report,
Being
it
the
kind of
report
is a bit duplicated. I think what you're saying is that at the time that the budget review request is made,
that's right.
That
so when I say the related report, I'm talking about the report to special budget.
Yeah. So, because ordinarily there wouldn't necessarily be a report to special budget for a line item budget request.
No, but I'd usually expect some paragraphs in the report.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think just instead of saying related report, I think you should say that the September budget review request or whatever it is set out a.
Yep.
Do you want to use the word refined or streamlined?
Set out a refined and streamlined.
Yeah. Okay, good. More words.
Yeah, what do they say?
Do we want to make it a 2A and 2B?
What is it? What did I say last round? A camel is a horse designed by committee.
Sure, this is exactly what's happening here. It's going to be a very, very skinny camel, let me tell you.
But we'll get it done by 5 minutes to midnight.
Yeah.
That's all right, just relax.
What's the vibe of the room?
We're hoovering it up.
Someone's going to do the work and it's going to be 2 months, 37.
Well, we'll find out in September.
Will we?
Yes.
We're no better or worse off anyway because the money's not there until September, whichever way this goes today. So in September, if it's completely not going to work, we'll know about it then.
Yeah.
Because we're not approving funding today. So the funding is theoretical as we sit here.
And Councillor Tozer, just to give you some comfort, I think the only reason why we're contemplating a changed recommendation is that we actually want more signs sooner in our community. It's about supporting the rollout. It's actually not about constraining it.
I think you're misreading me. I actually am supportive of the process. I just think if we're serious about it, we should allocate sufficient funding to deliver what we want. And at the moment, $50,000 is not going to give us what I think the General Committee has suggested they want, which is to continue the program. And it needs to be legitimate.
I think we all agree. We just don't want the resource spending 800 hours researching things that we know are historical things that are recorded already.
I'm not disputing the historical veracity of whether a person served or not. I think that there is a substance to understanding whether a street sign is named after that person or not. My interest is not in whether the military history is authentic. It's actually whether in my community, where lots of people have the name Robert for Robert Street, whether the veteran is named after that sign is named after the veteran, or that sign is named after the Lions Club president, or the Rotary president, or the winner of the wood chopping competition. And that's exactly where and that's where I think we're actually understating the importance of that research process, because someone is going to be disappointed if we get that wrong, and we should actually legitimately try to get it right and allocate enough resources to do so.
Unfortunately, what experience tells us is that when that process was, the process you're proposing was the first process that city officers took from our first general business item. And I think we had a suggestion of three or four. And it was actually council then two. There was one in Labrador, and where was the other one? There was two. So when you constrain the selection criteria to what you're kind of asking for, and you too, Councillor Castro, we would have spent $180,000 for 2 street signs. And it was because Councillor Caldwell, Belden Lumsden and myself met with city officers after the first memo was circulated that we properly communicated what the committee intent was, that we ended up with an expanded program that loosened that test and provided us the ability to put poppies up on the street signs. to reflect family names, right? And that process in our pilot was faultless and warmly received, and no one was disappointed. So experience tells me loosening that selection criteria, getting closer to Brisbane rather than what we might have had originally, delivered more street signs with less resources and attracted the most amount of community support. This takes us further along in that journey.
I'm not going to argue with you. I disagree, but...
No, well, we're going to get into debate anyway shortly, so you can disagree. Councillor Gates, would you like to move the amended motion?
I'm happy for Councillor Caldwell. He constructed the words. I'll second it.
All right.
Since it's a camel with two humps.
That's moved by Councillor Caldwell, seconded by Councillor Gates. Councillor Caldwell, would you like to speak to the motion?
Look, most of what I would want to say on this I had already said earlier in my question time, so I won't repeat it. Other than to say, which is the important message, that the whole concept of this was to uplift the commemoration of people who have served from our city and take them from, perhaps being on a plaque or a monument and bringing them into the everyday lives of Gold Coast residents so that we can have an active and visual memory on a day-to-day basis of the sacrifice that was often made by these people. And I think where we've got to, and I think we're all on the same page here, we actually want to make sure that this program is successful. But from my perspective, I want it to be nimble and responsive and getting this done quickly because, the residents are not getting any younger, who some of this will mean a lot to, and it's important that we get on with it. So I think we need to turn these around quickly and make sure that we get the message out there. And I really hope that come, say, next Anzac Day, that we can make sure that there's a list provided to each of the local RSLs to say, did you know that in the last year in the suburbs near your RSL, we have named these streets after return service people or those who gave their lives for our country? And I think that would be a lovely thing for us to do.
In a booklet, perhaps. Councillor Tozer, did you want to speak against?
Yeah, look, I actually want to echo what Councillor Caldwell said. I think remembering our veterans and those who have served before us is really important for our city. And I also think it's a dimension of our city that's not well known. The history and heritage that is in our, that exists across the city is profound and interesting. And it's interesting to members of the community who have skin in the game when it comes to ex-service people and their families and those who are not, who don't have those people in their families. What I think's eminently important is that when council allocates resources to change street signs or honour people properly, that we apportion the right amount of resources to do that and make sure that where possible we do actually acknowledge all people in our community who have served. And I don't mean necessarily served in wars, but also those who have served the community in other ways. In my community, we have a park named after Elsie Laver, and the Laver family name is really prominent in my community. Elsie didn't necessarily serve in a war, but she lost, as I recall, a fiancé to a loss in war. And that's a very sad story, but Elsie herself served so profoundly in my community. I would hate to think that just by accident we acknowledged a service person named Laver instead of Elsie's service just because we're trying to do the right thing. And I think I have concerns that by not allocating enough resources to this project, that risk is real and present. And in my community, that's really important. So I can't support the motion as it is. I think it's driven by us wanting to be frugal, which I think is admirable. But that being frugal, allocating less resources than we need to, I think is actually exposing us to risk that potentially jeopardises the reputation of really important community contributors. I know that no councillor in this room intends to do that, but I can't support the motion in its current form under resourcing what I think is a really important program that if we want to do it, we should resource it properly.
Thanks, Councillor Tozer. I'm going to exercise my right to speak and to respectfully disagree with the points that you raised. The reality is that the resource requirements are a function of the process, the nomination process, the assessment process, and the approval process. You change the process, you change the resource requirements. And what we're doing here is to more closely mirror a very successful process that we see in other local government areas, in particular Brisbane City Council, who have rolled out a program with little or no risk. I'm not aware of any incident where people were offended. I'm comforted by the fact that when we had the most stringent process attached to this pilot, we would have spent between $160,000 and $180,000 putting 2 stickers on 2 street signs. And I think that is a greater disservice than adopting a more common sense process that allows us to act with some discretion to recognise family names where there has been a contribution to the community, but not necessarily a council decision linking a service person to a particular street. We would soon run out of opportunities to acknowledge veterans. And again, that to my mind is the greater disservice. Just with respect to the Laver family, Laver Drive in Robina in Division 11 now carries the poppy insignia. And I'm not sure whether in your dealings with the Laver family, they've felt uncomfortable or harmed in some way with Elsie Laver's reputation, given the fact that Laver Drive now carries this poppy. I'd suggest not, because I haven't had any feedback as the divisional councillor. So I think in reality, there is a way of having a common sense approach that does not create paperwork and red tape and affords us as a council more opportunity to acknowledge families and individuals who've made a contribution. I don't believe the risk is material, and if we are to eliminate the risk, we would end up with 2 street signs a year. And I think that's actually, as I said at the start of this contribution, the greater disservice. We will find out in September whether this is the appropriate level of resourcing, and it could be that it's not. We're relying on some feedback from Councillor Gates. It might be that that figure has to be 75,000, might have to be 100,000, right? We don't know, but we're giving city officers the opportunity to make that bid in September. So whatever the resources need to be, I'm sure we will deliver those resources. We're not going to constrain the program. We're merely trying to construct a process where more people get to be acknowledged than not. Councillors, any speakers against the motion? Councillor Castro? No.
Yeah. I was going to, but yeah, I mean, given that for me the September budget review, as you say, that's my main concern, that we're not under-resourced, because I do still have genuine concerns that we could get it wrong. So at least then we'll get an idea of what's needed, but I certainly don't want to under-resource it either.
Yeah.
So,
Councillor Tozer, did you want to foreshadow the city officer recommendation?
No, I'm just going to let it play out. I think you have support, or the motion, the mover has support.
Yep, no worries. All right, councillors, I'll put that...
I'll just close briefly. And,
yeah,
and that's to say that we just need to reflect on the fact that this program is called Streets of Remembrance, okay? So the whole concept is that we're using street signs to remember. And Elsie Laver has been memorialised in a park. So, you know, that is actually what she has been given her recognition through that gift. And I think that at its worst, the highest placement that Councillor Lacastra could possibly say is getting it wrong means that we put it on a street sign that relates to someone who's served, but that someone else has the same name and claims. Now, to me, that's not actually a mistake. That's exactly what the program sets out to achieve. And so I think on both of those fronts, whilst I appreciate the concerns, the overarching effort of this program is to do exactly what we do with this motion.
Thanks, Councillor Caldwell, for closing debate. And as I munch on this Anzac biscuit, I'll call, yeah, that was a setup. I'll won't call a division unless anyone like to. I'll just put that to a vote. All those in favour? All those against? Councillor Tozer, would you like to be noted?
I know. Live streaming's on.
Sorry?
The live streaming's on. It's okay.
Okay. Yep. No dramas. We'll have an opportunity to reconsider that at council, of course. All right. Thank you, officers. We now have item 7.1, which Councillor Caldwell had some questions for. Councillor Caldwell, it's a closed session item. Would you like to move us into close for your questions?
Second.
Yep. So we'll move into close. That's moved by Councillor Gates, seconded by Councillor Caldwell. And let me just give you the reason, which is that it's budget. And it may also directly affect the health and safety of an individual or group of individuals. All right, so all those in favour, moving us into close. All those against, that's carried. If we could evacuate the gallery and All right. For those tuning in, we considered a closed session item that dealt with the city's budget and some safety concerns which may affect an individual or a group. However, we are moving into open to carry our recommendation, which reads, let's skip over the boilerplate, adds 2, that council approves the introduction of permanent LPR technology through the safety camera network commencing in 22-23, and that consideration be given to an expansion of the LPR rollout in future years, including in urban villages and where reliable SEN infrastructure may be available. Not much I can say on this other than to point out that LPR technology is licence plate recognition technology. Plainly, there's a nexus here with our safety camera network, and for the sake of clarity, deals nothing with parking. Just throwing that out there. That's moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Lacestre. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? All those against? That is carried. All right. Unfortunately, again, for those tuning in, we have to deal with a second closed session item, item 7.2, which is our Gold Coast Regional Botanic Gardens update. Councillors, would someone like to move us into close?
I have a question, firstly. I'm just wondering, what is it that's actually confidential? Because just because it affects the budget doesn't mean to say that it has to be confidential, because I can only assume that our 4-year capital works program has numbers published.
Through you, Mr Chair, the main reasons for its confidentiality is there are cost estimates including in the report. Yeah. If we at some stage in the future go to tender, that could disadvantage or advantage both the city or persons tendering in that process.
All right. Okay. So long as we don't deal with cost estimates, we can remain in open? Director?
So you're... Well, can I just... So you're going to give a presentation of some description, like a slideshow?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is there anything confidential in your slideshow?
Yes.
Okay.
Estimates of costs?
Yes.
Okay. And I just want to flag that we're live streaming, and as far as I can recall, the camera points to the councillors, and behind the councillors we've got images.
Well, it's less about
those images
it's less about what's transmitted, and it's more about the fact that if we're in open, the information then is not confidential. Yes. It could be then. Okay. About, you know what I mean?
All right.
Anyway, so that's fine.
So for those tuning in at home, in order for councillors to benefit from the presentation, we have to move into closed, and that's because the presentation itself contains the confidential information which we can't avoid, because skipping past a slide would still make it published in the open. So would someone propose that we move into close? Councillor Lacestre, Councillor Belden-Lumsden seconding. And the purpose of, or the reason, is that we are dealing with a matter that affects the local government budget, and I'm not sure that it affects the health and safety of an individual or group, but I suppose it's nice and healthy if you're in a botanic garden, like for your mental health, going for a walk, that's affecting your health. But I think we can delete F. Right? I mean, F... Director, F doesn't apply in this case, does it? No. So we can delete F and rely just on C. All right, so moved Councillor Castro, seconded Councillor Belden-Lumsden. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? All those against? That is carried. Live streaming off. we go. So thanks for your patience, everyone. Unfortunately, sometimes we have to deal with confidential information which forces us into close. That's to protect your interests as viewing ratepayers. We'd love to share more about this important Gold Coast story, though, and Councillor Castro has proposed to move the committee recommendation. It's seconded by Councillor Tozer. Councillor Castro, mindful of the confidential elements of the report, might invite you to open debate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Look, this is something that the City has been looking at, working towards for the last 3 financial years to actually introduce a biodiversity visitor centre to the Botanic Gardens. It quite clearly is something that research shows would be very well supported by visitors to our city. It would add an extremely popular component to the gardens. The gardens are taking place. We always knew when these gardens were established 20 years ago, when the decision was made 20 years ago to establish these gardens, that it would be a 20 to 25 year project, and that's proving to be the case. This is, but clearly, as number 8 actually shows there, we also need to make sure that the road can actually handle the number of visitors that we expect that this will attract. Already, the gardens are very, very popular, and locals and visitors to our city are already patronising the gardens. We believe that that this addition of a biodiversity visitor centre will increase the number of visitors significantly and inject some much needed funds into our local tourism economy. So very good, very, very good. So I'm hoping that this is something that will be supported, because I think it's something that would be very, very welcomed and very well utilised by our city, or in our city.
Any speakers against? No, would you like to close, Councillor Castro? Happy days. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? All those against? That's carried. Another win for Division 8. Councillors, we now deal with some general business items. We'll deal first with not Enckelman Farm. If we could, seeing as we've got Mr. Greenwood here, I'd like to move that vote of thanks to Mr. Ross Greenwood. That Council acknowledge and thank Mr. Ross Greenwood for his service to the city, in particular leading the revitalisation and construction of new parks. Got a seconder, Councillor Castro. So moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Castro. Councillors, this is the last time Mr. Ross Greenwood will appear at committee, and it's it's not a great development when you lose city officers that have been part of the fabric of the organisation, but not just to take up a position, but actually to demonstrate leadership over time. And Ross, for the last 2 decades, has been involved in projects including the Palm Beach Parklands, the Broadwater Parklands, and even now the Regional Botanic Gardens Visitor Information and Biodiversity Centre. He's led and been part of teams that have delivered city-changing projects, but also, in a benefit for ratepayers, also led the charge on better asset management in our parks and gardens, because when we have these assets contributed by developers and when we construct them, we kind of raise community expectations. And Ross, I know, internally has always lobbied to make sure that we have a good asset management plan in place to protect those assets and make sure that they continue to provide amenity to the community. Ross, I consider your departure a real loss. Just personally want to thank you for some of the insights that you've provided me so that I could make sneaky manoeuvrings in the chamber. Yeah, I'm very sad not to be working alongside you, but wish you all the best for the future, and maybe just wanted to invite you to share a few remarks with committee.
Yeah, I'd love to. It's been a quarter of a century that I've been working with the city, and there's a couple of things I'd just like to reflect, not only to the councillors here today, but past councillors. I think I've worked through something like the Barlton administration, the Ron Clark administration, and Mayor Tate's administration. I felt very envious working for a city like the Gold Coast. Often, shortly after budgets were brought down and we would receive our parks budget, I would get calls from my colleagues from other park agencies spitting chips over the phone saying, Ross, I can't get over the capital works program you guys are about to embark on. I can't get over the park maintenance budget that you have been offered to care and maintain for the parks estate. These are women and men who work in similar local authorities that were hardly had enough money to mow up at their city 10 times, and they didn't even have a capital works budget. So to be working for a local authority such as yourselves that is so dedicated to its parks and open space and its beaches, it's been a really great, it's been a highlight of my career to be here. The other one, that a decision that council made a few years back, and I think was one of the best decisions council's ever made, was to form the Parks and Recreational Services branch. That allowed the manager, its coordinators, team leaders and supervisors to really focus hard on parks and recreation, because prior to that we were throwing quite a few other rats and mice and other things in the mix to deal with. And so it's allowed that branch to evolve, develop and put together a really good team of professionals and skilled staff. And, you know, and they're going to be the people that are going to take the reins and the batons forward as we go forward. I'd like to thank Ron Jacobs for making my time at council challenging and rewarding. And Tony, who has allowed me to channel my efforts on the Biodiversity Centre in the last months of my time here with council. I had a mentor say to me once when I first came to council that, Ross, you're working for the Gold Coast City Council. I said, yeah. And I said, that's a pretty progressive pro-development council. And I said, yes, I believe so. And he said, you will be challenged so much on by the impacts that may occur on the parks and open space estate. And I sort of took that on board, and I offer no apology to officers and even councillors where occasionally I've said, I'm sorry, I can't support that proposal. If I felt that it had an adverse impact on our parks and open space estate that I knew the community valued and cherished, you probably found that I often spoke up and gave you my advice and opinion on whether something was good for the city or otherwise. So thank you. It's been a great gig. It's 10 years in forestry, over 30 years in local government, quarter of a century here at the Gold Coast, and it's been the best of my career.
Yeah. Thanks, Ross. And yeah, it's never been lost on me. You had the most fitting name for any city officer in any role. Thank you for your service and congratulations. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, can I just add something very, very quickly before
please,
Ross goes as well? Just as a past chair of this committee, I just wanted to give my personal thanks to you, Ross, too, for all you've done. I mean, you just heard the words of a very passionate man there, very passionate about what he does. You know, he loves what he does, and the great thing, and Ross just spoke about this, is you never have to die wondering what you think. You're always very, very upfront and tell us exactly what you think, which for me I appreciate, because I like to know where I am with people, but you've always done it in the right way. It's always been done with great dignity and that's the word I'm looking for, and tact. You certainly will be missed. Your knowledge and just your passion for the city is something we're all, I'm sure, highly appreciative of. So thanks very much, mate. So yeah, thank you.
Sorry? Oh, sorry. Thank you. Good catch. Who's chairing this meeting? You are. I'll put that to a vote. All those in favour? All those against? That is carried. Thank you. All right. Enckelman Farm. Here we go.
So, given the council resolution, we could say pertaining to rather than on, pertaining to 396 Stanmore Road, Yatala, a further report be brought back by March 2023 in relation to the relocation of the Oxenford Pony Club and opportunities for equestrian uses within the city. So moved.
Moved by Councillor Gates. Are you seconding it? Yeah, are you seconding it? Okay. Yep, seconded by Councillor Tozer. All right, Councillor Tozer, you had a question?
My question through you, just to the Director. I feel like we had a conversation with one of the officers the other day about this whole of city equestrian report. Does that whole of city equestrian report coincide with this timeline?
Through you, Mr Chair, yes, Councillor, it does. So it's part of that whole project that we were doing. So the first aspect of this was to look at the Oxenford Pony Club in the first instance, with other equestrian users following. Now, with this resolution, we'll just take some time to go and look at some potential other locations, but it is a whole of sport investigation.
So just got it clear, I fully support Councillor Gates's passion and commitment to the Oxenford Pony Club. And want to make sure that report comes back. Are these going to be two separate reports? My understanding of that broader whole of city equestrian report is it actually was going to include each pony club and equestrian community group as stakeholders, and they may have formed part of that bigger report as well.
Through you, Mr Chair, no, it'll be the same report, the one report. It won't necessarily address every single equestrian group, but it will look at where we've started looking at some rationalisation and the best case for it, and a couple of groups that don't have a home. There are two very large groups that don't have a home currently. It'll all be part of that project. So no, this is essentially just moving a time frame. We had a report back in November. It's just giving us a few more months to consider all that work and look at some other locations.
So in the absence of this resolution, that future report would have presumed the Oxenford Pony Club being located at Enckelman Farm. So this removes a constraint to end up with a better report.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it also means that then the report that was expected in November will now be delivered in March?
Correct. Through you, Mr Chair, correct.
Okay. Just off the, on notice then, could I get an update on some of the engagement in relation to equestrian? I'm just negotiating with the Motorboat Pony and Hat Club, and I told them that it was going to be here by the end of the year. So,
Councillor Gates, do you want to open? No, I'll put it to a vote. All those in favour? All those against? That is carried. All right, now we've got no, just joking. Meeting closed at 12:09. Thanks.